Hello everyone, my name is Alex, and I'm here to share a story that's haunted me for years. It started when I was 9 years old and my parents divorced. They shared equal custody, so I spent most weekdays with my mom, who lived close to my school, and weekends with my dad. Despite the split, both of them treated me with kindness and love, making sure I knew they cared deeply about me. I was sad they weren't together anymore, but I understood they still loved me, even if they didn't love each other. A couple of years later, when I was 11, my dad introduced me to his new girlfriend, whom he called Lisa. She seemed kind at first, and I could see my dad was happy when he brought her into our lives. I wanted things to work out, so I hoped we could all get along. Lisa had twin daughters, Sophie and Sarah, who were 14 at the time. They'd grown up without their dad, and Lisa had been their sole parent. Because of this, the twins were immature for their age, prone to tantrums whenever things didn't go their way, or if Lisa and my dad didn't buy them what they wanted. In contrast, I was quiet and introverted, preferring to sit on the sidelines and watch when they made scenes. After a year of dating, my dad and Lisa got married. I was 12 then, and even my mom attended their wedding, showing her support. I was excited about having more people in the family, convinced that this change would bring more happiness. For a while, I believed Lisa and I were building a bond. That illusion shattered one morning a few months after the wedding. We were alone in the house when she told me, in a low, cold voice, that she didn't actually like me. She said we needed to pretend to get along for my dad's sake, but that she didn't want me to bother her when he wasn't around. My heart broke as she told me she hated seeing my face because it reminded her too much of my mother. The twins, who overheard this exchange, used it against me, teasing that my dad loved them more than me and that I was alone. I was devastated and told my mom, who was furious, and called my dad. He assured her that there was no way Lisa would say such a thing and suggested I must have misunderstood. The next time I visited, Lisa was cold and silent until my dad left the room. Then she leaned in and whispered that if I told my mom anything again, she'd make sure I wouldn't have a dad left to turn to. She threatened that she'd divorce him and take everything if I tried to speak up. Terrified for my father, I nodded, too scared to push back. After that day, Lisa found subtle ways to make my life difficult. She belittled my appearance, calling me ugly and pointing out my flaws. My dad never noticed, assuming everything between us was fine. He even pushed me to go on shopping trips and outings with Lisa and her daughters. But during those outings, Lisa would use his credit card to pay for meals but wouldn't let me order anything beyond soup or dessert. I sat there, stomach growling, watching them eat full meals while fighting back tears. At home, she'd force me to go to bed hungry. Every Friday, as the weekend approached, my anxiety would spike. I dreaded the visits and would try to fake illnesses to stay with my mom. Both of my parents noticed, and my dad would call, sounding hurt and disappointed. My mom would ask if something was wrong, but I stayed silent, too afraid of Lisa's threats. When I was 14, my dad planned a family trip to Greece. I didn't want to go, but my mom urged me to take the opportunity and experience something new. Lisa acted sweet in front of my dad, asking me about school and pretending to care. But I saw through her act. She'd make passive-aggressive comments disguised as jokes, and when I tried to tell my dad, he'd brush it off, saying I was too sensitive. On that trip, Lisa and the twins kept teasing me about my appearance. One day, by the pool, I reached my breaking point. When they started their taunts again, I snapped. I told the twins they shouldn't talk, considering they both had double chins, and turned to Lisa, saying her shrug didn't hide her belly, making her look like a penguin. The color drained from her face and she stormed off. The twins yelled that I was horrible and later told my dad, who lectured me for hours about respecting women. I tried to explain that they'd been tormenting me, but he didn't care. He made me apologize to Lisa, who milked the situation for sympathy. Back home, I told my mom what happened. She called my dad, who again blamed me. But this time my mom threatened to involve CPS if Lisa continued her behavior. For a while, Lisa stopped openly tormenting me, but ignored me when my dad wasn't around. I accepted that as a better option than her bullying. When I was 16, my mom had to travel, so I stayed at my dad's house for a few days. Lisa complained about cooking for an extra mouth, so I offered to make dinner one night. I prepared everything, and her friends who were visiting complimented the meal. Later, I overheard Lisa telling them that she couldn't stand me, and couldn't wait until I turned 18 and wouldn't have to come over anymore. She admitted she hoped I'd fail at cooking so she could berate me. It stung, but I kept quiet, realizing any kindness she showed was a facade. College felt like an escape. I spent less time at my dad's place and more time focusing on my studies, work, and friends. But even with that distance, my dad insisted on visits during breaks. Lisa's attitude never changed. She'd act all sweet and welcoming when he was around, but would revert to ignoring or subtly insulting me as soon as he left the room. The twins were no different. They'd only acknowledge me to make sly comments or remind me how much more my dad loved them. During one visit, I woke up late, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Lisa burst into my room without knocking, startling me awake. She scolded me for being lazy and said I was an embarrassment. I had just graduated top of my class, balancing a full course load and a part-time job, but none of that seemed to matter to her. It was always the same. I was never enough in her eyes. Her invasion of my privacy went beyond barging into my room. She'd search through my things, opening drawers and peeking under my bed. I never understood what she was looking for, but it made me feel violated. The worst part was, if my dad noticed anything was off, he'd chalk it up to stress from school or assume I was exaggerating. I felt trapped, always tiptoeing around Lisa and the twins, making sure I didn't give them any ammunition to use against me. One evening, while sitting in my room, I heard Lisa on the phone with one of her friends. She spoke loudly enough for me to hear through the thin walls. "I don't know why he even bothers coming here. He's just a reminder of the mistake my husband made marrying that woman before me." I clenched my fists but said nothing. I'd learned that responding would only make things worse. The tension reached its boiling point when I turned 21. My dad called, saying he had important news and wanted me to come visit for the weekend. It had been months since my last visit and I hesitated, but my mom encouraged me to go. "Maybe it's something good," she said, trying to sound hopeful. So I booked a ticket and made the trip. When I arrived, my dad was waiting at the airport, smiling like old times. It was a glimpse of the relationship we used to have, and for a moment, I felt at ease. We drove back to the house, and he told me he'd reveal his news during dinner. The twins were home when we arrived. They barely acknowledged me, and I returned the favor. Lisa wore her usual fake smile, but I caught the quick flash of disdain in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. That night, at dinner, my dad stood up to speak. He talked about how grateful he was for his family, and how losing a close friend recently made him think about life and what mattered most. I listened, unsure of where he was going with this. Then he dropped the news. He'd spoken to a lawyer and drawn up a will. Lisa's face lit up, and the twins exchanged excited glances. Dad announced that he would be leaving the house to Lisa. She beamed and kissed him on the cheek, clearly satisfied. He continued, saying he wanted me to have his entire retirement fund and his prized vintage car. That car meant everything to him and to me too. He'd told me stories about it for as long as I could remember, taking me on rides and sharing memories of his youth. It was a symbol of the bond we used to have. Hearing that he wanted me to have it felt like a small victory, a sign that he still cared. But Lisa's smile turned sour. She shot a look at the twins, who exchanged knowing glances. My dad then said the joint bank account he shared with Lisa would be divided between her and the twins. It was fair, and I was content with the arrangement, but the twins weren't. They complained, saying they deserved more and that the retirement fund should be theirs too. Lisa chimed in, arguing that as a man I should find my own way, while her daughters needed more financial security. My dad held firm, reminding Lisa that he'd already set up college funds for her daughters and that they'd have a house and bank account. He said I deserved something for my future too. The argument escalated, and the mood at the table turned tense. Then suddenly, Lisa burst into tears. My dad and I exchanged confused glances as Lisa sobbed uncontrollably. He reached out, asking her what was wrong. Between gasps and sobs, she said, "I can't do this anymore. I kept quiet for so long to protect this family, but I can't live with it any longer." The room fell silent. The twins looked at me, eyes wide with curiosity and something darker. I felt a pit form in my stomach. My dad urged Lisa to explain, his voice trembling. Wiping her eyes, Lisa accused me of doing something so vile, so unexpected, I thought I'd misheard her. She said that after our trip to Greece, I had been acting inappropriately toward her, invading her space and making her feel unsafe. I was paralyzed. The words hung in the air, too heavy to process. Lisa painted a picture of me lurking around her room, trying to barge in when she was alone, even going so far as to suggest I'd attempted to assault her. The twins gasped, pretending to be shocked, while my dad's face turned ashen. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my voice cracked under the weight of disbelief and anger. "Are you serious, Lisa? You're lying and you know it!" But Lisa's sobs only grew louder, and the twins shouted over me, calling me disgusting, a monster. My dad looked torn. He asked Lisa why she hadn't said anything before, and she replied that she was too afraid no one would believe her because she was just the stepmother. She played her role perfectly, the victim who had suffered in silence for the sake of the family. I was desperate. "Dad, you know me. You raised me. I would never—" He cut me off, his eyes filled with hurt and confusion. "I need you to leave, Alex. Until we figure this out, you need to go." The words hit me like a blow. He believed her. The man who'd raised me, who shared stories with me about his youth, was sending me away because of a lie. I packed my things with shaking hands, every minute feeling surreal and raw. The house that once felt like a second home now felt suffocating and foreign. I couldn't comprehend how my dad could even consider believing Lisa's story. The memories of laughter, car rides, and bonding moments with him played in my head as I stuffed clothes into my bag, tears streaming down my face. The twins watched from the hallway, smirking like they had just won a battle they didn't even deserve to fight. Lisa sat on the living room couch, dabbing at her eyes, a fake victim wrapped in lies. As I walked out, my dad stood by the front door, eyes downcast, not even looking at me. "I'll call you once things are clearer," he mumbled, but I didn't respond. I stepped out into the cold night, each step echoing the feeling of betrayal pounding in my chest. I drove straight to my mom's place, arriving late. She opened the door, surprised and worried, taking one look at my red, swollen eyes before pulling me into a hug. I told her everything. The words tumbled out, broken and mixed with sobs. My mom's face turned from shock to anger to heartbreak as she listened. "I can't believe it," she whispered. After all those years, after everything, he chose to believe her. She was ready to storm over there, confront Lisa, and tear her lies apart. But I stopped her. I couldn't risk more chaos, more lies twisted to fit Lisa's narrative. The next few days passed in a fog. My dad didn't call, and the silence spoke louder than any words. The twins and Lisa, though, kept sending me messages. They ranged from taunts to warnings to vile accusations. They called me names, claimed I was dangerous, and told me to stay away from their family forever. It got so bad that I had to change my number. Even with the new number, the damage was done. I was haunted by their words and the betrayal that came with them. The months turned into years. I tried to focus on college, then my career, but the paranoia stuck. I second-guessed every interaction, worried that any woman I met might someday turn on me the way Lisa had. I avoided dating, kept to myself, and even distanced myself from friends. The fear of being falsely accused and of losing everything again followed me like a shadow. My mom, my rock through it all, never wavered. She stood by me, fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, and held me together when I felt like I was falling apart. She saw me through some of my darkest times, even when I hit rock bottom, unable to get out of bed for days at a time. When things got really bad, she came to stay with me for a while, making sure I ate, slept, and didn't drown in my own despair. Despite everything, life moved on. I pushed through the dark days and found small pockets of light. Therapy helped, slowly pulling me out of the pit I'd been stuck in. And then I met Mara. She was everything I didn't know I needed. Kind, understanding, patient. She saw past the walls I'd built and never pushed me to explain until I was ready. My mom loved her, and that meant the world to me. Little by little, Mara helped me remember what it felt like to trust someone. Just when I thought I'd finally left the past behind, I got a call that reopened old wounds. It was from an unknown number, and I almost didn't pick it up. I assumed it was a telemarketer or some random spam, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end made my heart stop. It was my dad, Alex. He said, his voice shaky and unfamiliar. I hadn't heard it in 7 years, and he sounded older, frailer. I didn't know what to say. My mouth was dry and my mind raced with questions, anger, and confusion. Before I could speak, he started talking, almost pleading, saying how much he missed me. I listened in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "Why are you calling me?" I finally asked, my voice cold and distant. He dodged the question and asked if I was okay. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "Don't call me again," I said, ready to hang up. "Wait, please," he interrupted, his voice cracking. Then he started crying, and I felt a pang of something, sympathy, anger, I wasn't sure. "I need to tell you I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stayed silent, waiting for an explanation. He took a shuddering breath and said that Lisa had been cheating on him with one of his closest friends. He'd found out, confronted her, and to his shock, she admitted it without hesitation. She didn't even try to deny it. She just looked him in the eye and said she was tired of pretending to love a man like him. My dad's voice broke as he recounted how she'd finally admitted to making up the story about me to get me out of the picture. She wanted his money for herself and her daughters and didn't care how much damage she caused to get it. Hearing that made my blood run cold. The betrayal cut deeper now, knowing it had all been part of her plan to take everything from him, from me. I wanted to scream, to yell at him for believing her over his own son, but I bit my tongue. He went on saying he divorced her and that she got nothing in the settlement because of the affair. It was all too late. The damage was done, and nothing he said could change that. "I was a fool, Alex," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I believed her lies and lost my son because of it. Please, can we talk? Can we fix this?" I closed my eyes, the anger and grief swirling inside me. "You were supposed to know me better than that, Dad. You were supposed to believe in me." He didn't respond, just sobbed on the other end. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I don't think I can forgive you. Not now. Maybe not ever. Don't call me again." I hung up before he could say another word. The calls from him and his side of the family started soon after, with messages pleading with me to forgive him, telling me he'd suffered enough. But they didn't know what it was like to be abandoned by your own father for a lie, to carry that wound for years. The calls and messages didn't stop. My dad's side of the family, the same people who had shunned me when Lisa's lies first surfaced, were now demanding I forgive him. They said things like, "He's been through so much," and "He's lost everything. Don't make it worse." It was as if they'd forgotten the pain and humiliation I'd been through, how they turned their backs on me without a second thought. I felt trapped, stuck between the echoes of my father's sobs and the relentless guilt they tried to lay on me. I talked to my mom about it one night. We sat at her kitchen table, the same place where she'd comforted me countless times as a kid. Her eyes were soft but serious. "Alex, you owe him nothing," she said firmly. "He made his choice and now he has to live with it." I nodded, but a part of me still felt conflicted. The dad I remembered, the man who used to take me on long drives in that vintage car, was different from the man who'd sent me away so easily. Mara noticed something was wrong. She always did. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she put her hand on mine. "Talk to me," she said. I took a deep breath and told her everything, starting from the phone call to the flood of messages that followed. Her face shifted from worry to anger and then to sadness as she listened. "You don't have to forgive him," she said, echoing my mom's words. "But you also don't have to carry this alone." Her support gave me a strange sense of relief. For years I'd carried the weight of Lisa's betrayal and my dad's abandonment like a stone strapped to my chest. Talking about it made it feel just a little lighter. One night as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, memories of those years came rushing back. The nights I cried myself to sleep, too afraid to tell anyone the full extent of Lisa's cruelty. The way my dad always chose to look the other way, convincing himself that everything was fine. I realized then that I'd never truly opened up to anyone, not even my mom, about what life had been like, living under Lisa's shadow. The next day I called my mom and asked if she could come over for dinner. When she arrived, Mara was already there, setting the table. We sat down, and I cleared my throat, suddenly unsure of where to start. "I need to tell you both something," I began, my voice trembling. I told them everything, The way Lisa would corner me when my dad wasn't around, her whispers dripping with disdain. How she'd insulted me, starved me, invaded my privacy, and threatened me with the one thing that mattered most, my dad. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking and my throat felt raw. Tears streamed down my mom's face, and Mara reached over to squeeze my hand, her own eyes glistening. I quote, "Am so sorry, Alex," my mom said, her voice breaking. "I wish I had known. I wish I could have done more." She pulled me into a hug and I let myself lean into it, feeling the weight lift a little more. Mara wiped her eyes and nodded. "You didn't deserve any of that, and it's okay if you never want to speak to him again." Hearing that gave me a sense of validation I didn't know I needed. For years I'd battled guilt, wondering if I was being too harsh by cutting my dad out of my life. But this wasn't just about one decision. It was about years of neglect, of believing someone else over his own son, of standing by while I suffered. The weeks passed, and my dad's attempts to contact me slowed down. The messages from his family, however, didn't. They insisted I was being cruel, that I was punishing an old man who'd made a mistake. But to me, this wasn't just a mistake. It was betrayal. It was believing a lie that ruined my life and never coming to check on me, not once, until he had nothing left. One evening, after a particularly bad day where I'd received multiple calls from unknown numbers, I blocked every last one of them. The peace that followed was immediate, like the world had gone quiet for the first time in years. I knew I wasn't ready to forgive, and maybe I never would be. And that was okay. My life wasn't about him anymore. It was about moving forward, about choosing my own happiness and holding on to the people who stood by me when things fell apart. I focused on the things that mattered. My career was on track, and I found fulfillment in what I did. Mara and I grew closer, her kindness and patience helping me rebuild trust. My mom, always my pillar, continued to support me in every way she could. I even started therapy again, digging deeper into the scars left by Lisa's lies and my dad's betrayal. Slowly, the nightmares faded. The tightness in my chest loosened. I started to believe that I wasn't defined by what Lisa had done to me or by my dad's choices. I was more than that. I was stronger than the years of silence, the false accusations, and the weight of being abandoned. Mara and I started making plans for the future, talking about moving closer to my mom and what life could look like in a place where new memories could be made. One night, sitting under the stars, I took her hand and asked if she'd spend forever with me. The way her eyes lit up, the smile that broke across her face as she said yes, it was the first time in years I felt true, unfiltered joy. The months after our engagement were filled with moments I had long given up on believing I would ever have. There were days of laughter, of planning, of hopeful conversations about the life Mara and I would build together. My mom was ecstatic, already talking about how she'd help us look for a house near her neighborhood. It felt like a new chapter, one that I could finally write for myself. Therapy became more than just a way to cope. It became a path to reclaiming the parts of me that Lisa and my dad's betrayal had taken away. I began to let myself feel more, to enjoy moments without the constant undercurrent of anxiety. The therapist helped me navigate the mixed emotions I still felt about my dad. Anger, sadness, loss, they all tangled together. But I learned that it was okay to feel conflicted. Healing wasn't a straight line, and it didn't come with clear answers. One evening, as Mara and I sat with my mom over dinner, she brought up something that caught me off guard. "You know," she said softly, "if your dad ever shows up in person, you don't have to talk to him, but you should be prepared for the possibility." The thought of facing him made my chest tighten, but I nodded. She was right. It had been over a year since the first call, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try again. It turned out my mom's instincts were right. A few weeks later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I peered through the window and saw him standing there, my dad, looking older than I remembered, with tired eyes and hunched shoulders. My heart pounded as memories flooded back. Mara, who had been reading on the couch, noticed my sudden stillness. "Is it him?" she whispered. I nodded, feeling a rush of emotions, fear, anger, a strange ache I couldn't name. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see him but not invite him in. "Alex," he said, his voice even raspier in person. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to beg for understanding. Please, I just need a moment." I stood there, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door and shut him out forever, but another part, the part that had spent years craving an apology, an acknowledgement of the pain he caused, kept me in place. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. He sighed, the weight of his years evident in the simple act. "I needed to see you. I needed to tell you to your face that I'm sorry for everything, for believing Lisa, for abandoning you. I lost my way, Alex, and I can't live with myself if I don't at least try to make it right." The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. I searched his face for any sign of the man I used to look up to, the dad who once made me laugh and told me stories. He looked broken, but I didn't feel satisfaction or relief, just emptiness. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice shaking despite my resolve. "You turned your back on me when I needed you the most. You let her destroy me, and you didn't even come to check if I was okay." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he nodded slowly, as if he'd already known I'd say that. "I understand, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry." Truly, Mara appeared behind me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Her presence gave me strength. "I'm moving on," I told him. "I'm building a life, and it doesn't include you. Maybe one day I'll feel differently, but not today." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening as he looked down at the ground. "I'm proud of you, Alex. For surviving, for living despite everything. I just wanted you to know that." I nodded, a small gesture that seemed to mean everything and nothing at the same time. Without another word, he turned and walked away, shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. I shut the door and leaned against it, feeling the air rush out of my lungs. Mara wrapped her arms around me, and I let myself be held. The final piece of that chapter finally lay to rest. In the days that followed, I felt lighter, not because things were fixed or because I'd forgiven him, but because I'd faced the past and come out the other side. The future felt open, full of possibilities, not just shadows. Mara and I moved closer to my mom, buying a small house with a porch where we could sit and watch the sunset. We talked about our dreams, laughed about silly wedding plans, and took long walks in the neighborhood that was quickly becoming home. My mom was over almost every weekend, helping with wedding preparations and telling stories that made us laugh until our sides hurt. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Story 2. "My Niece Stole From Me" is the title of this tale, which was posted online. Her parents' response left me stunned. For years now, I have been collecting perfumes. I began working my first job at a fast food restaurant as a poor teenager, saving money for months to get my first actual bottle. After a few decades, I find myself sitting on this enormous collection of more than 400 bottles. Yes, it sounds a little excessive, but I like it. There are those that collect coins or stamps. Me? I like to smell good. Some of the bottles I bought cost hundreds of dollars, while others are quite uncommon. The collection is worth more than I'd want to acknowledge, to be honest. If individuals are interested, I'll occasionally offer them a sample. I'm not frugal with it. My pals are aware of it. And if they're interested, I'm always willing to let them sample a spritz or two. However, my niece really went above and above. Let me now describe how this happened. By allowing my 17-year-old niece, M, to visit my house to walk my dog, I believed I was doing my sister a service. She had been requesting some additional money, so I thought I would give it to her to assist me. She is liked by my dog. I didn't give it much thought because she lived close by. She would stop over, take the dog for a walk, stay for a while if she wanted to, and then easily go home. However, I've noticed a strange thing regarding my scents recently. Some bottles just had a different appearance. A few of them were missing the lids, which I discovered on the opposite side of my dresser, and several contained far less liquid than I recalled. I initially believed that I could have been utilizing more than I had imagined, but eventually the calculations didn't add up. Some of my favorite bottles, which I only wear on rare occasions or haven't even touched in weeks, were showing dents. I had a gut feeling that something wasn't right, but I thought maybe I was just being overly suspicious until one night while I was browsing Instagram. I'm not sure how, but I eventually came into M's private account, and sure enough, she allowed me to view her tales without barring me. I thought, Oh hell no. As soon as I clicked on it, it was there in front of me. She displayed these decant tiny sample vials, listed the pricing of each, and wrote a series of short essays promoting my fragrances as if she were holding my real bottles in her hand. I felt sick to my stomach. Everything was on her Out Rouge bottle, which cost me more than $300, 2 pictures of my back, Burberry, her Daisy Flower Bomb, you name it. She was selling these small samples to her friends, and they were all for sale. This was more than a few spot sprays. Since she had her profile set to private, she naturally believed she was being cunning when she turned my collection into her own side business. Like, yes, all right, because no one will ever see that. She was so casual about it, and that's what really annoyed me. According to the articles I was reading, she had been selling perfume for weeks and was charging a hefty price of, say, $20 for 5 milliliters of Baccarat Rouge. The thought of how much money she had stolen from me made my blood boil. It was more than a minor slip-up. This was purposeful, premeditated, and downright rude. She was treating it like her own department store, and I trusted her to be in my personal space. That night, I stayed up reading through all of the stories, noting every bottle she had posted and taking screenshots. I reasoned that I would bring receipts if I was going to confront her. By the end, I literally had a list of 15 perfumes that she had snatched from. I began calculating, attempting to determine the precise cost of her. Replacing some of these scents is difficult, particularly the unique ones I purchased from specialized websites or even foreign countries. She just set aside the time, money, and effort that go into a collection like this for her small side business. I double-checked my bottles the next day to make sure. Indeed, the dings were precisely where I had anticipated. Her filthy little hands were emptying my Baccarat Rouge into small vials to sell for lunch money or whatever she needed the money for, and I couldn't even smell it. Nor did she know what she was doing. I mean, correctly decanting fragrances is an art to avoid ruining the scent. She obviously didn't care though. She was simply filling odd vials with things, most likely spilling as much as she was conserving. The fact that she didn't even consider the possibility that I would notice was what annoyed me the most. She just figured I wouldn't care or wouldn't realize. I don't know if she thought she was being slick or if she was actually that ignorant, but it rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, if you're going to steal, at least be smart about it, right? But no, she just banked on me, not paying attention as if I don't take pleasure in what I've built. By the end of it, I'd racked up over $500 in damages. And to be honest, I have no idea how much she wasted or spilled when filling those vials, so that's definitely low-balling it. It was a respectable amount of coin though, between the bottles with the large dents and the entire bottle she swiped. I sat on the information for the next 2 days, getting angry every time I glanced at my fragrances. I wanted to make sure I had everything planned out before I confronted her, even though I knew I would. I examined each bottle, noting the precise amount that was gone and verifying it with her Instagram photos. This was more than simply an adolescent error, and I was prepared to provide her and my sister with all the proof. Let's be clear, if she had wanted a few sprays, I wouldn't have cared. If she had asked for a few samples for her friends, I wouldn't have objected. But pilfering? Trying to sell? I was shocked that she would go there. And I was prepared to demonstrate to her the extent of the catastrophe she had created. I realized I couldn't ignore this information after holding on to it for a few days. I called up my sister, asked if I might stop by and talk. She had no clue what was about to happen, of course. I practiced what I was going to say while driving over there. I wasn't holding back, and I had my printed list of scents with me. My niece was in the living room when I arrived, completely unaware, most likely planning her next sale or browsing TikTok. I wanted to lash out at her then and then, but I had to hold back. We sat down at the kitchen table when my sister arrived, beaming. "I get right to the point," I inquired. "Do you know what this is?" After laying out my list on the table without wasting any time in small conversation. She was initially perplexed when she looked down and noticed her daughter's small perfume company in black and white. I began by outlining everything I had discovered, including the Instagram stories, the missing fragrances, and the rates they had been charging. My sister's expression quickly changed from bewildered to frightened, and she froze as soon as she observed her mother's expression. The only thing my sister could say when she turned to face her was, "Please tell me this isn't true." M began to stutter and made a variety of justifications, such as, "I thought you wouldn't mind. It isn't a huge problem. I intended to inform you." Yes, of course. We all knew that she was full of it. "You really think I wouldn't notice $500 worth of perfume missing from my collection?" I interrupted her. She had nothing to say. She remained still, resembling a deer caught in headlights. She wasn't some naive child who didn't know any better, I told her. She was well aware of her actions. It wasn't just a few spritzes for her pals. This was outright stealing, and they would most likely be phoning the police right now if she had done this to anyone else. My sister attempted to intervene, claiming that she was just a child. However, I refused to accept it. I informed her that this was not a simple oversight. She had been selling off my belongings behind my back, betrayed my confidence, and lied to me. I explained everything, ensuring that my sister and I were aware of the whole expense of our small side project. I was aware that my sister was becoming defensive and attempting to defuse the situation, but I refused to allow her to turn this into a teaching opportunity. Look, I don't give a damn if she's your daughter, I told her. She is 17 years old. What she was doing, she knew perfectly well. She believed I would overlook it because she wanted to make a quick profit. Then came the bit I knew would be difficult. I insisted that they reimburse me in full. Based on what she had posted, what she had taken, and the value of those bottles, I informed them of the total. My sister had eyes that seemed to pop out of her skull. She attempted to explain to me that they couldn't afford to spend so much money all at once, and that Emmy had been saving for a vehicle, and that this would entirely deplete her funds. I gave a shrug. I have nothing to do with that. If you are old enough to be a little businesswoman, you are old enough to face the consequences when you screw people over, I added, glancing at them. She was beginning to cry, but I wasn't going to allow myself to feel guilty about it. When she took my belongings and sold them, she wasn't sobbing, was she? My sister's tone changed at this moment. Her accusations that I was overreacting, that this was just perfume, and that I was damaging her daughter's future over something material greatly irritated me. She went from being defensive to being downright irritated. I suggested to her that perhaps we wouldn't be sitting here now if she had truly punished her kid, rather than allowing her to get away with such behavior. I informed her that if M had done this to anybody else, the repercussions might have been far severe. I told her that I had every right to call the police, but I was also giving them an opportunity to work things out between us. M eventually said something, saying that I had so many cents that I wouldn't notice, so she didn't think it was a big problem. I got that. Do you think I purchased all those fragrances so you could come in and grab them anytime you wanted? I questioned her. Without a word, she simply stood there staring at the floor. She obviously didn't understand or value what it meant to respect other people's property, I informed her. I refused to accept my sister's final attempt to patch things up by promising to pay me back in installments or come up with another solution. I informed her that at the end of the month, I needed the entire sum. I threatened to use other means to collect what I was due if they didn't pay me back. I interrupted my sister in the middle of her argument by declaring, "I'm done talking about this. I want my money back, but you two work it out." I made it plain that M was no longer welcome in my home before I departed. I advised my sister to stop making excuses for her kid and start holding her accountable if she ever wanted to attempt to clean up this mess. I wasn't in the mood to listen to M's mumbled apologies. I suggested that she use her pocketbook as an apology. I could hear my sister attempting to reprimand as I was leaving. M and M are still attempting to justify themselves. I was no longer even concerned. I simply wanted them to understand that they couldn't treat people this way and give me my money back. And perhaps my niece might reconsider doing such a heinous act on another person if she gained any knowledge from it. That was the showdown then. I left with a sense of relief, but I was also a little angry that it had ever come to this. I believed that giving my niece some money for dog walking was a favor. I had to explain basic respect to each of them while losing hundreds of dollars. I believed the worst was over after the altercation at my sister's house. I assumed that after a few days they would calm down, perhaps see their mistake and just reimburse me. I wasn't asking for anything out of the ordinary. Really, all I wanted was what I was due, but it seems like that was too much to ask for. the reaction from the rest of the family was something I didn't anticipate. All of a sudden, it seemed like everyone had a viewpoint and none of them supported me. I began receiving calls the day after I addressed them. My mother was the first to call me early in the morning and babble about how family members don't behave in this manner. The entire was pulled by her. I was being far too harsh on your niece, who is only a child routine. She said that because it's only perfume, I should just move on and let it go. Yes, of course, Mom. Don't care that I spend hundreds of dollars on this baby. I informed her up front that anyone may contribute if they wanted to pay for it. I couldn't let it go, though. She continued to complain that I was acting irrationally and harshly since she didn't appreciate my response. I asked her what she would do if someone broke into her home, took items valued at hundreds of dollars and began selling them. Would that be acceptable to her? She continued talking about forgiveness and family values in an attempt to sidestep the subject. I had heard the same speech since I was a child, each time a member of the family made a mistake and attempted to get away with it. This time, I wasn't buying it. Then, allegedly after my mom had reached her, my aunt called. She expressed her opinion that I was damaging my connection with my niece over a pointless collection in a much more straightforward manner. You don't know the value of my collection, so let's not act as though it's foolish, I told her. She asked whether I wanted to be the reason Em was unable to get her first automobile in an attempt to guilt trip me. Like, somehow, I was suddenly to blame for the entire situation. It seems that Em had sobbed to the family about her cruel uncle's demands, which were depleting her savings for a car. She made it sound like I was being a tyrant and that she had only stolen some fragrances. My aunt continued talking about how heartbroken Em was and how she was only attempting to be kind to her friends. It seemed unbelievable to me. My niece was operating a ridiculous perfume business, and I was the bad guy somehow. I remained composed, but I informed my aunt that Em could view this as a costly lesson in property etiquette. With a sigh, my aunt murmured something along those lines. All I want is for you to be content with who you are. Yes, if people stopped acting as though I had committed some sort of crime here, I would be much happy. Almost every relative with a phone had contacted me by the end of the day. In an attempt to mediate the situation, others suggested that I reach a compromise or find a solution so that Em wouldn't lose all of her funds. Some just informed me that I was exaggerating, even though Em had been stealing from me for weeks, maybe months, and had no intention of stopping until I found her. Not one of them seemed to care. You would believe I had taken from her based on the way they were speaking. After that, my sister called, and I must say that she was not pleased. She presented this complete to me. Your petty spiel is causing the family to fall apart. It wasn't petty, I told her. That collection was something I had fought hard to earn, and I wasn't going to let her daughter's small business destroy it. She began to scream, accusing me of ruining Em's future, that I needed to mature and become the larger person since I was being self-centered. I asked her whether she would feel the same way if Em had stolen and sold her belongings. After a little pause, she immediately resumed accusing me. Em is apparently inconsolable as she had to delete her Instagram account and return a portion of the purchases she had already made. Excellent. Perhaps she will reconsider taking things that aren't hers. However, my sister pretended that this was some sort of catastrophe, claiming that Em was ashamed and humiliated now that she was unable to purchase her vehicle. Maybe she should have considered that before launching a fucking resale company in my living room, I informed her, if Em was ashamed. I just felt exhausted after that call. I was disappointed more than I was outraged. I don't see how my family could look at this circumstance when I was obviously the one who had been harmed, and yet support Monsieur Manoying. I attempted to convey to a few cousins that trust was more important than money. Em had completely betrayed my confidence in her, and I was determined to ensure that my sister took responsibility if she wasn't already. My mother then sent me a lengthy text message regarding family therapy a few days later. She stated that she believed it would be beneficial for us to all get together and resolve this. After reading that, I nearly burst out laughing, thinking, yeah, Mom, I'm going to sit in a room and have everyone tell me how wrong I am for expecting basic respect. I informed her that I didn't require counseling. I needed my money returned. She didn't answer. As the days passed, A slight change caught my attention. A few family members began to calm down and consider my point of view. In fact, my cousin, who works in retail, phoned me and said she understood it since she frequently witnesses people attempting to do scams. She told me she was on my side, that she couldn't believe them, and that she felt she would get away with it. However, most of the others just ceased communicating with me, as though I had gone renegade myself. Being in the right and being made to feel like the odd one out is strange. Because I dared to advocate for myself, I am now essentially the family's outcast. Emma and her mother have yet to reimburse me, and it appears that they will continue to take this bad stance in the hopes that I would give in, but I refuse to do so. They may tell the entire family anything they want about me, and I've told them that if I don't get paid by the end of the month, they're going to have a lot bigger issue. I can't let this go, though. Thus, yes, we are at this point. The other half of the family believes that I am a monster. My sister believes that I'm trying to destroy her daughter's life. As I sit here, I wonder how people would react if the roles were reversed. They could eventually get it. I'm not holding my breath, though. After a few weeks, neither my sister nor I have heard much. To be honest, I was hoping that they had finally made the decision to simply reimburse me and end this problem. However, no. Rather, I receive a text from my sister stating that she would want to apologize in person and that it would be beneficial for everyone to discuss the matter face-to-face. After all the familial turmoil, I already felt uneasy about it. I figured that this would not be a sincere apology, but whatever. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally going to do the right thing, so I agreed to meet up. We arranged to meet in a local coffee shop. When I stepped in, I saw them sitting there with their arms crossed, as if this was the last place they wanted to be. With my sister looked very anxious. I could see right away that this apology would be a farce. However, I took a seat, inhaled deeply, and bided my time till they began. First to speak, my sister said, "Em has something she wants to say." "I'm sorry it was so half-assed," Em murmured, sighed, and kind of rolled her eyes. It was so unbelievable to me. She didn't give me a glance and didn't appear really apologetic. She seems to have practiced the bare minimum of what she believed I would agree to, only so she could say she was sorry and move on. But I wasn't going to accept it. I advised her to look me in the eye and say it with sincerity if she was going to apologize. After giving me a fierce look, she glanced up and replied, "Okay." Even though I apologized for stealing your perfume, it wasn't a sincere one. There was no regret, no recognition of her true actions. The fact that she was caught just irritated her. "Do you even understand why what you did was wrong?" I questioned her. "I guess," she shrugged, "but it's just perfume. I assumed you wouldn't give a damn. It seemed unbelievable to me. She still didn't get it after all this time. It's not about the perfume," I informed her. "It has to do with trust. I opened my house to you. I trusted you with my belongings. And you made the decision to exploit that. That's the problem." In an attempt to mediate the situation, my sister interrupted by stating that she had apologized and that she now understood isn't "tit time to move on." That wasn't acceptable to me. I informed her that apologizing without any real purpose is insufficient, particularly when she refuses to accept accountability for her deeds. Then I was struck by meme. "Perhaps you shouldn't have so much things sitting about if you didn't want others to touch it." That truly irritated me, Guy. I was shocked that she would even suggest that I was to blame for this. "Having a collection does not provide you the right to steal from it," I informed her. "It doesn't imply you may take it whenever you want just because I have a lot of it." I could see my sister becoming agitated when she rolled her eyes once again. "Let's not make this a bigger problem than it needs to be," my sister said, in an attempt to defuse the situation. Larger problem. We had moved on from it. I informed her that the problem had grown. The second Em made the decision to convert my home into her own perfume boutique, Em really started laughing at that moment, which infuriated me. She seemed to believe that the entire situation was a comedy. "This is precisely the issue," I remarked, turning to face my sister. "She is indifferent. She doesn't apologize. She succeeded. She just apologizes for being caught." Using the argument that she is young, my sister attempted to defend her. She was wrong. At her age, we all made regrettable decisions. I fired back. Yes, but I wasn't trying to seem like it wasn't a huge problem while taking hundreds of dollars from relatives. My sister then changed her strategy, and I saw her adopting the worried parent persona. "You're taking this way too far," she remarked, glancing at me. "He has been greatly impacted by this entire situation. She has been really agitated. She's humiliated in front of her friends, and now that she's paying you back, she doesn't have any money left over for her automobile. All okay. Should I sympathize with her? This is what she did to herself," I informed her. "Perhaps this is what she needed to wake up to." "I think you're just holding on to this to be difficult," my sister stated with a sigh. "What sort of family are we if family cannot forgive family?" "A true family," I reminded her, "wouldn't attempt to betray one another in this way." Even though I could tell that my remarks had an impact on her, she still didn't seem ready to accept responsibility. My sister finally remarked, "Well, Mom has refunded her friends for the sample she sold, and she's taken down her Instagram." After a few awkward minutes of silence, "She has made every effort to put things right." "That's the very least," I answered, laughing. "All I've received is a pathetic apology, and I'm still down hundreds of dollars." Finally, M dared to suggest that we might not even need to be here if you didn't panic out. "For me, it was it," I told her, looking her in the eye. "You're going to have a difficult time as an adult if you believe that's how excuses operate." Evidently irritated that I wasn't letting her off the hook, she simply huffed and turned her head away. When I refused to back down, my sister eventually asked if there was anything she could do to put things right. I assured her that she could, in fact, reimburse me in full. No complaining, no excuses. She must earn forgiveness if she wishes to receive it. My sister didn't protest, but I could see she wasn't happy about it. I believe she understood that if she persisted, I could genuinely think about going to court or doing something else that they would even detest. After a while of sitting in quiet, my sister finally groaned and promised to find a method to give me the money. "You'll have to work this out," she added, glancing at them. M only moaned. She was obviously upset that her small apologies did not absolve her. Without saying another word, she raced out of the coffee shop. After giving me a weary expression as if I were the cause of her problems, my sister added, "I hope you're happy with yourself." I assured her that I would be as soon as I had my money back. She simply turned and walked away without saying anything. I don't even know how I felt when I left the coffee shop. I'm disappointed, weary. They attempted to turn the tables on me as if I were the one who was being unreasonable, but I went in the hopes that perhaps they would see that they were at fault. If that's how they're going to interpret it, then so be it. I didn't want to be the antagonist in this situation. I quote, "am tired of going above and above to satisfy everyone at the end of the day. They're trying to make me the villain. All right, I just want what I'm entitled to." Okay, so I thought things would settle down after that disastrous meeting. I would move on if they ignored me or paid me back. It quote, "as seldom that easy though." Instead, there was a full-scale family rupture. All because I had the audacity to make my niece answer for her actions. Given how everyone is acting, you would think I had threatened to set fire to the family home or something. A few days following the entire coffee shop incident, my mother gave me a call. I knew this would not be a cordial check-in, so I braced myself. As expected, she started talking about how I had irritated everyone and how the entire situation was dividing the family and creating a lot of stress. She began implying that perhaps I should simply end it for the purpose of maintaining harmony, since she was concerned about the dynamics inside the family. I listened to her list while I sat there, every possible explanation for why I caused this catastrophe. I assured her mother that I wasn't the reason behind this when she eventually stopped. Mom did when she made the decision to sell my belongings and help herself. She attempted to claim that M was just a child and that she was not fully aware of the repercussions. My mom wouldn't let it go, even though I laughed and told her that she knew enough about the repercussions to keep it from me and pretend to be innocent. In fact, she attempted to withdraw the will. "If it requires a card, I'll reimburse you," as if I'd abruptly forget what my mother had done, only because my mother promised to solve the issue with money. I informed her that money was no longer the main concern. Because someone else saved her, I wanted them to accept responsibility rather than avoid it. No one appeared to understand that. The money wasn't the point. It was about forcing her to acknowledge that she made a mistake and that she couldn't just get away with it because of her family. Then I was struck by my mother. "You will lose family members if you continue to push this. Do you truly want that?" Such as, I was blown away. When I demanded what I was due, they were actually prepared to cut me off. I told her that maybe family isn't worth having around if they're so willing to abandon me over something like this. She quickly stopped talking after that and hung up. After a few days, I began receiving cold reactions from other family members. 2 cousins with whom I often got along stopped answering my texts. On Facebook, an aunt unfriended me. In a phone chat, my brother, who I assumed was on my side, said he understood my aggravation but felt I was being too harsh. He attempted to persuade me to overlook it by forcing them to pay the entire sum. Only this once. I urged him to keep out of it if he wasn't willing to truly understand why I was maintaining my ground, since Emma was learning her lesson and would never do it again. Then came the drama of the family group chat. My sister wrote a lengthy essay on how the entire issue had harmed her family and how everyone makes errors, obviously trying to win over sympathies. Furthermore, forgiveness might occasionally be worth more than cash. I didn't even try to respond. They were obviously trying to present her as an innocent child who had been wrongfully punished by her avaricious uncle. As I sat there, I wondered when the fundamental deference to other people's property was lost. After doing this for around a week, I discovered that in order to repay me, my sister and I had really approached a few other family members to borrow money. They were prepared to ask for handouts rather than allow her to utilize her own funds because they were so determined to keep them from accepting full responsibility. Naturally, they presented it as though we require assistance with this significant financial load. It was so absurd. And what do you know? They were able to gather the funds. I eventually received a bank transfer from my sister that included the sum I had computed at that time. There was no note from her, just the sum, nothing else. Not even a, "Here's the money." To be honest though, it seemed empty. Although I received my money back, it didn't seem like the victory I had anticipated. I saw my aunt in the supermarket a few days later. She looked at me as if I had personally insulted her by having the audacity to advocate for myself. "You know, there are better ways to teach someone a lesson than by making them miserable," she added, dragging me aside. "Perhaps the lesson here is that Em shouldn't have taken something that wasn't hers," I remarked, glancing at her. With a grumble about family loyalty, she rolled her eyes and left. "They've all concluded that I'm the issue here, which is crazy. The thing that really irritates me, though, is that since they reimbursed me, neither my sister nor them have tried to apologize. No follow-up? No. Hello, we apologize for the inconvenience." Radio silence. They seem to be angry at me for forcing them to bear the repercussions of my behavior. They are now harboring resentment. Now, the entire family divided. The other half only get in touch with me when they are in need, and half of them still avoid me. One of the few people who truly understands my side, my cousin, wrote me a few weeks later to let me know that Em was still reportedly whining about the whole situation. I was the cruel uncle who ruined her life over some dumb perfume, she had been telling her friends. She has shared a number of ambiguous anecdotes about money-focused individuals and poisonous families on her Instagram. To be honest, I don't give a damn about what her friends think. But the knowledge that she had learned nothing at all from this was painful. She still believes she is the victim in this situation. I don't regret forcing them to reimburse me in retrospect. I'm pleased I didn't simply let it go out of devotion to my family or anything, but I maintained my ground. If I claimed that this hasn't left me with a bad taste in my mouth, I would be lying. These days, it's not even about the money. It's about recognizing that my family would choose to ignore something rather than hold someone responsible when they are obviously at fault. Respect would have been great, but I wasn't expecting a procession or anything. I am the villain instead, the man who has little regard for family. I want it to be handled with fundamental respect, that's why. If nothing else, this entire event has shown me who I can truly rely on. Additionally, the list is far shorter than I had anticipated. That's the fallout then. My family is divided. I continue to play the victim and question whether I was ever really a member of this family in the first place. At least I have my collection intact, though. I'll also be far more cautious about who I let handle my belongings from now on. I suppose that's simply who I am today, if that's what they believe makes me the villain. Story 3. Throughout my childhood, I was deceived by my parents who said I was bringing shame to the family. I therefore always believed that my life was very normal when I was growing up, at least on the surface, however. Greg and Samantha, my parents, were the kind of people who always made sure everything looked flawless. You are aware of them. All of the family photos were faked. Every holiday has to be well planned. And it was required of me and my younger brother Danny to cooperate at all costs. We had it all together if you asked someone outside of our organization. But believe me when I say that's not at all the case. I believe I was around 17 when I first became aware that something was seriously wrong. My folks were behaving strangely on a random Tuesday evening. Have you ever entered a room and heard everyone abruptly stop talking? Yes, the atmosphere during dinner was that way. My mother had prepared her renowned lasagna. When she wanted to impress someone, she would invariably take out this one. My parents were looking at each other, however, rather than discussing their day as usual. All right, whatever, I thought. Perhaps they got into a brawl. I walked upstairs to my room after supper, going about my business, browsing Instagram or whatever, when I suddenly felt really thirsty. In an attempt to avoid waking anyone, I crept downstairs to get some water. I heard them at that point. My parents weren't fighting, but they were still in the kitchen. They were muttering. I didn't really care at first. However, I was stopped in my tracks when I heard my mother say something. Greg, we can't hide this from her forever. At some point I thought, she must know. What after all was she discussing? What did they have to conceal from me? Come on, how could I not eavesdrop? I'm not the kind of person who does that. I was afraid they would hear my heart thumping from the kitchen because it was so loud. I tried to hear every word as I leaned closer to the doorway. My dad, who seemed extremely anxious, muttered back, I know, but telling her now would ruin everything. This is a better method. Believe me, I felt as though I was out of breath at that point. Destroy everything. Even so, what were they discussing? I felt my chest constricted, but I made an effort to remain composed. I didn't wait for further information. Returning quickly to my room, I sat there and gazed at the wall. I thought I was losing my mind. What may they be concealing that would ruin everything? That night, I didn't get any sleep. Trying to figure it out was taking up all of my mental energy. I couldn't be adopted. My parents didn't behave as though I weren't their child. My mother and I shared the same hair color. That couldn't be possible because everyone constantly commented that I looked like my dad. Perhaps my brother Danny had something to do with it. I always found him to be quite mysterious. He never got into trouble, stayed to himself, and didn't really ask questions. It didn't appear to be about him, though. Everything appeared to be back to normal the following morning. I didn't have the courage to ask my parents, and they pretended nothing had occurred. The problem is that you can't unknow a secret once you've discovered it. I developed an obsession. I was unable to let it go. I began to focus more on the details, attempting to put together what they may be concealing. I had always listened intently to my parents' intimate conversations. I used to worry whether it was because of the secret every time they entered my dad's office and closed the door. Then, a few weeks later, I discovered my opportunity. Danny spent the night at a friend's house while my parents were away at an event. I was by myself at home. It was now or never, I knew. I needed to know what they were concealing. I did what any inquisitive, maybe paranoid kid would do. I began spying. Their bedroom was where I began. There was nothing out of the ordinary, but for the fact that my mother had a vast assortment of fragrances. Who needs that many, really? Anyway, I went to my dad's office since I couldn't find anything fascinating in their room. When he wasn't home, it was always locked. But that night, it was unlocked. Win big. Snooping around made me feel a little bad, but I had to know. I browsed through files, opened drawers, and looked under books, but nothing really caught my attention until I discovered an ancient wooden box in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a pile of papers. It had the appearance of something from an antique store. I opened it with trembling hands. It included a number of ancient letters that appeared to have been neglected for years, since they were all yellowed with age. The letters weren't from my mom, but they were addressed to my dad. They belonged to a person named Rachel, as well as what she was saying. They stopped my heart. Greg, I hope all is fine with Lisa. It's unbelievable how much she has grown. The fact that I can't be a part of her life makes me very sad. However, I am aware that Samantha and you are providing her with a better home than I could ever hope to." The floor seemed to fall out from beneath me. I continued to read, but each sentence became more intense. Tell her that she deserves to know the truth one day, please. I was thinking about her all the time. Why was Rachel mentioning me, and who the devil was she? As if she were my mother. I looked over the remaining letters, but none of them differed. Rachel's letter expressing her longing for me. She hoped I was content. She wishes that things had turned out differently. In the worst conceivable manner, everything began to make sense. The secret they were keeping. My true mother was Rachel. I had been living a lie my entire life. Samantha, the lady I mistakenly believed to be my mother. She wasn't even my mother. She was acting. I was ill. I was having trouble breathing. I was unable to think. I slammed the drawer shut and pushed the letters back into the box. I hurried up to my room after leaving the workplace and shut the door. I tried to process what I had just learned while sitting on the floor and cradling my knees. I had lost any sense of who I was. I was unable to face my parents that evening. I was unable to face anyone. I simply lay in bed and stared up at the ceiling, wondering whether I had ever experienced reality in my life. Okay, so I couldn't stop reading after that night when I discovered those letters. I was in a daze for the following 3 days and could hardly see my folks. It always felt phony when they spoke to me. As if they were performers in some strange production. I mean, how was I supposed to believe anything they said? I had the impression that I was living with strangers. Trying to act normal was the most difficult thing. Every fiber in my body was urging me to approach them, yet I still chose not to. I suppose I was just afraid of what people might say. But what if they said no? What if they continued to fabricate lies? That wasn't what I was expecting. After being really tense for a few days, I finally lost it one night. I made the decision that I needed to leave the home and get some fresh air. So I texted Jess, my best friend. When I was panicking out, she was always amazing at soothing me. We made the decision to get together at this small cafe that we frequently visited after school. Jess could sense something was wrong as soon as I arrived. Before I didn't even have to say anything. "What's going on, Lisa?" she said. "It appears as though you had seen a ghost." It wasn't a true laugh, but I did kind of laugh. It's more like that shaky, uneasy chuckle you have when you're at a loss for words. "This will be unbelievable to you," I began, but I was unsure of how to express it even as I spoke. How do you simply drop, really? Hello, I've been living a lie my entire life, and Rachel, a strange woman, is my true mother. I inhaled deeply before letting everything out. I explained to Jess the letters, what I had heard my parents say, and how I had been obsessing ever since. She merely listened while sitting there with her eyes wide. Her mouth was hanging open when I was done. She remained silent for a minute, and I began to believe that I had gone utterly crazy, as if I had dreamed the entire affair. But then Jess replied, "This is messed up, Lisa," and shook her head. "You must speak with them." As in, really. You can't ignore this indefinitely. Even though I knew she was correct, it didn't make things any simpler. My existence seemed to be a glass house, and everything would break the moment I flung that rock. I was no longer able to pretend, though. I had to face them, so I did it the next evening. I waited till Danny had already gone upstairs after supper. In the living room, my parents were watching one of their favorite true crime programs. I remained still for a moment. With my heart thumping in my chest, I wondered how I should begin. I simply blurted it out at last. "Who is Rachel?" As soon as I finished speaking, my mother hesitated. This uneasy hush enveloped the room and the TV. My dad looked at my mom as if he was waiting for her to deal with it, but he remained silent, normal. Nothing was ever handled by my dad. My mother's face turned pale, and I briefly believed she may pass out. "Where did you hear that name?" she said after taking a long breath. I located the letters. I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone. "She quote my true mother. I know that." My dad's face crumbled, and I watched. He appeared to have been struck in the stomach. However, my mother entered a state of complete denial. She sprang up from the couch and said, "You had no right to go through our stuff. Lisa, we've taken care of everything for you. You were reared by us. You had a fantastic life because of us. What more would you like? What I was hearing was unbelievable. What am I looking for?" The truth is what I desire. All of my life you have been deceiving me." She made an attempt to counter by claiming that they were defending me, how they acted in my best interests, and how Rachel wasn't suited to be a mother. But they never offered me a choice, and it was all I could think about. Without even asking if I would like to hear the truth, they made the decision that was best for me. At last, my father raised his voice. He spoke shakily. "Lisa, we didn't know how, but we always intended to inform you. We believed it would be best if you were unaware." I gave a head shake. My eyes are burning with tears. "You felt it was preferable to tell me lies and give me the impression that my life was flawless when it wasn't, quote, T. My dad gave me a serious look for the first time, and his eyes were filled with shame, which I could see. "We never intended to cause you harm," he added quietly. We were unsure of how to inform you." I came to a realization at that point. They weren't only lying to keep me safe, to keep themselves safe, they were lying because it would damage the reputation she had established. My mother didn't want anyone to know she wasn't my biological mother. And my father, he lacked the courage to oppose her. I wiped my eyes and inhaled deeply. I must meet her. My voice was solid as I said, "I must know her identity." My mother began to object, but I didn't mind. I had already decided, no matter what, I was going to locate Rachel. Lies had been the foundation of my entire life, and I was entitled to the truth. I refused to allow them continue to hide that from me. I remained up late that night looking for any sign of Rachel online. Just her initial name and a few old letters were all I had. However, I was adamant. I finally discovered something after hours of looking. Although it was an old, little-used Facebook profile, it was unquestionably hers. The photos in the messages reminded me of her face. My finger lingered over the send message button as I gazed at the screen for what seemed like an eternity. My hands were trembling and my heart was pounding. It was the moment I had simultaneously hoped for and feared. I finally inhaled deeply before typing the message. "Hello, Rachel. This is Lisa. I believe you to be my mother." Before I could second-guess myself, I pushed submit, and I felt like throwing up right away. Now there was no turning back. I had no clue what was waiting for me on the other side of the door, which had opened into a whole new chaotic universe. I was in complete chaos after sending Rachel that message. My stomach flipped every time my phone chimed, assuming it was her. I had no idea what to anticipate. For example, what would you say to the lady who abandoned you and then remained in hiding for over 20 years? Nothing happened as the days passed slowly. No answer. I began to have second thoughts, wondering if she would want to meet me. Or worse, perhaps she didn't give a damn. Perhaps my parents were correct when they said she was a mess. Suddenly, however, a week or so later, I received the message. "Hello, Lisa. It's been a while since I received this communication. I would adore meeting you." That was it. It was only 2 phrases, but my hands were trembling uncontrollably. I had no idea how to feel. A part of me felt relieved, while another half was terrified. I had no idea what she would be like or whether this would end badly. I had to know, though. I needed to meet her. We scheduled our meeting at this little coffee shop a few towns away, most likely to avoid encountering anybody we knew. I kept it a secret from my folks. They were obviously already mad with me for even contacting Rachel, and I didn't want to start another argument. This was something I had to do myself anyhow. I was a complete mess on the day we were meant to meet. I was unable to concentrate and eat. With all the what-if scenarios, my mind was racing. What if she failed to appear? What if I detested her when she appeared? What if I was completely unknown to her? Naturally, I was too anxious to wait at home, so I arrived at the coffee shop around 20 minutes early. I took a seat by the window to watch her as she entered because the space was tiny and peaceful. My heart did this strange thing where it felt like it was about to explode out of my chest every time the door opened. Then she appeared. It was both strange and reassuring to see how much she resembled me. Her nose and black hair were identical. I felt as though I was staring at an older me. She appeared anxious and was a bit slimmer than I had anticipated. She immediately recognized me and grinned. I was unable to even return the smile. I sat there locked in place. "Hello, Lisa. was the first thing she said as she approached. You look just how I thought you would. I was at a loss for words. I felt like I was shutting my throat, but I did it. Keep quiet. Hello. It wasn't my ideal starting statement, but it was something. We sat down and were silent for a minute. It was really weird. I hadn't even added sugar to my coffee. I was simply sitting there swirling it. She continued to stare at me as if she was unsure of what to say. The stillness was finally broken by her. She whispered softly, I know this must be really strange for you. I've been thinking about this moment for a long time, but I'm not sure where to begin now that it's here. I gave a nod. I'm still unsure of what to say. After all, how can you strike up a discussion with someone who gave birth to you but has always been a complete stranger? How come you never made an effort to contact me? When I finally managed to speak, I inquired. Ever since I read her letters, I had been pondering that. She never pushed harder or tried to see me, even though she sent them. I had to know why. With a sigh, Rachel turned to face her hands. I was the first to do it. However, your parents, I was not wanted in your life. And to be honest, I wasn't feeling well at the moment. I was struggling, broke, and young. I believed that staying with them would benefit you more. I couldn't give you a life, but they could. I wasn't prepared for the sadness in her eyes when she halted and looked up at me. I didn't want to ruin your life, Lisa, but I've always wanted to be a part of it. I just did that every time I considered pushing harder. I feared it would worsen the situation. I was unsure of how to react. What do you even say about it, really? I had some understanding, but I was angry in another way. She simply allowed them to take me. She allowed them to lie to me and raise me. Because my true mother didn't stand up for me, I felt as though I had been robbed out of knowing her. I'm not sure. My voice trembled as I spoke. Although I understand your motivation, it doesn't make things any simpler. All my life they were lying to me. They gave me the impression that everything was ideal. Then I learned. You've spent the entire time here. I also didn't know. Rachel grabbed my hand from across the table. And I didn't draw away for some reason. Lisa, I'm very sorry. I never intended for you to suffer harm. If I could return, I would take a different approach. However, I cannot alter the past. Now, if you want me to, I can only be here for you. That was a powerful blow. That type of emotional blow was not what I was prepared for. I was unsure of my want for her in my life. Everything about it was too raw and fresh. However, she was also my mother, my true mother, not the one who reared me. And a part of me was curious about her, curious about what I had been missing for all these years. I have no idea what I want, I said, attempting to be truthful. I'm happy we're conversing, but this is a lot. I'm still attempting to solve it. Rachel gave a nod as though she comprehended. Go slowly. We don't need to solve every problem at once. When you're ready, I'm here. After that, we continued our conversation. Mostly minor things. She gave me a brief overview of her life, how she had managed to get her act together at last, how she now had a job and her own home. She inquired about my interests and schooling. She seemed to be attempting to make up for all the years she had missed, which made it strange. She gave me a hug when we eventually said our goodbyes, and it seemed natural. That was unexpected. I expected it to be strange, but it wasn't. For the first time, I had the feeling that I might not be alone in this. Meeting Rachel was a first step, but I still didn't have all the answers. And I had the feeling that perhaps, just possibly, things might begin to make sense for the first time in a long time. Okay, So I assumed that things would start to calm down when I met Rachel. I thought I could have some peace of mind and some answers, however. Not at all. My life became even more chaotic, if anything. I didn't anticipate how difficult things would get after I returned home. I thus made the decision not to notify my parents immediately away after the entire coffee shop encounter. Since I was still digesting things, I really didn't want to go into another heated debate. However, you are aware that problems always manage to catch up with you. Yes, that is precisely what took place. I was mindlessly surfing on social media in my room one evening when my mother knocked on my door. I could tell she was still harboring some of that animosity because I hadn't really talked to her or my dad since our last dispute. In any case, she enters, sits on the side of my bed, and lets out a huge sigh as if to communicate her distress to me without really speaking. Traditional? Samantha? Get moving. We must speak. When she does say it, I immediately feel sick to my stomach. It's never good news when someone says that. Yes, it was at this very time. What is it about? I pretended that I had no idea where this was headed when I inquired. I suspected that she had learned about Rachel in some way. She jumped straight in without even waiting for me to finish speaking. I am aware that you have communicated with her. I went cold. My palms began to grow clammy and my heart began to race. She was referring to Rachel. Of course, that tone of speech was unmistakable. How? How are you aware? My thoughts were racing as I stuttered. I hadn't informed them. Furthermore, Rachel wasn't exactly using social media to announce our meeting. My mother glared at me coldly. At the coffee shop, Greg noticed you. Her remarks were acerbic and accusatory. I had no idea my dad had been in the neighborhood that day, but it seems he had been out conducting errands when he noticed me. What a waste of time. How come you didn't inform us? She made a demand. Her voice was growing louder. You had a meeting with her behind our backs. This is how you pay us back for everything we've done for you? What I was hearing was unbelievable. She seemed to be playing the victim, implying that I was the one who had let them down. All of it had too much nerve. I lost my temper. All that you have done for me. You mean every untruth. You always gave me the impression that my family was ideal, whereas in reality the reverse was true. I was trembling as I spoke. I didn't care though. I was too angry to remain composed. I could tell my mom was struggling to preserve her composure as her cheeks flushed. Lisa, we did what we believed was best for you. You have no idea how difficult it was. Rachel could never give you the life we gave you. She wasn't prepared to have a child. However, you never offered me an option. I responded with a shout. You made the decision for me. You didn't even consider what I would desire when you made that choice. That's not how you get to run my life. My dad entered at that very moment. He seemed exhausted, as if he had heard a yelling from downstairs, as if none of this was anything he wanted to deal with. However, he was there, watching us fight from the doorway. Please, Lisa. He spoke quietly, as if he were attempting to project composure. We are your parents. You were reared by us. At the time, we acted in accordance with our beliefs. When you were younger, we didn't want to confuse you. I felt like I had been struck by a vehicle as I turned to face him. I'm not perplexed. I'm upset. All my life, you kept Rachel away from me. You gave me the impression that everything was well. It's your fault, though. And now everything is upside down. My dad remained there for a moment, stroking his face as if he was trying to think of anything to say. My mother, however, wasn't finished. As she got out of my bed, she spat. You're being ungrateful. Do you believe Rachel will suddenly become the mother you've always desired? Lisa, she gave you up. She left you. I knew she was only attempting to hurt me, even if her comments hurt. Attempting to control me, like she usually did. She stayed with me. Quieter now, but firmer, I said. She wasn't prepared. It was you who held her at bay. My dad intervened between us at this time. Enough, he remarked in a serious voice for once. Yelling at one another will not get us anywhere. He was clearly attempting to mediate the situation, but it was too late. The harm was already done. My mother slammed the door behind her as she ran out of the room. For a minute, my dad just stood there and gazed at the floor. I apologize, Lisa. After what seemed like an eternity, he said. We really believed that we were doing morally. I didn't answer. I was unable to. I was unsure of how to respond to him. I just knew that our relationship would never be the same. I sat on my bed and stared at the ceiling after he departed. With all that had just transpired, my mind was racing. The altercation, the charges, the real Rachel, all of it was too much to bear. I got the impression that everything in my universe had been turned upside down and there was no turning back. My mother didn't say anything to me the next morning. She didn't give me a glance. She behaved as though I didn't exist, which, to be honest, I was okay with. I didn't want to put up with her passive-aggressive bullshit. It was really embarrassing, but my dad attempted to make it seem normal by asking me about school and other topics. I felt even worse since I could tell he was being cautious. Rachel sent me a note later that day. She said she wanted to tell me a lot more and that we may get together again if I was interested. I didn't think twice. My folks weren't going to give me the answers I needed. I left the house without telling anyone where I was heading.